What would you do with the person everyone ignores? The man living in the shadows, cold and hungry, suddenly became the one who saved your life. Tonight's story will leave you stunned, as a homeless black man risks everything to protect a police officer after spotting something no one else could. This isn't just survival, it's redemption, and it will change the way you see people forever. Welcome back to BrainFuel, the channel where powerful, true-to-life stories meet unforgettable lessons. Here, we share the moments that shock us, inspire us, and remind us of the strength of the human spirit. If you love stories that make you think, make you feel, and sometimes even change your perspective, you're in the right place. So hit that subscribe button, and let's dive into today's powerful story. Don't talk. The words cut through the silence like a blade, sharp, commanding, and almost otherworldly. Officer Maria Sanchez stopped dead in her tracks. Her hand instinctively brushed against the grip of her holstered weapon as her senses heightened. It was late evening, the kind of night where the city seemed to exhale. Traffic had thinned, storefronts were shuttered, and only the occasional sound of footsteps echoed in the distance. Maria was no rookie. She had been on the force long enough to trust her instincts, and they were screaming at her now. The voice hadn't been loud, yet it carried an edge that demanded obedience. She slowly turned her head, her dark ponytail brushing against the stiff collar of her uniform. There he was, a figure slouched near a dumpster at the end of the alley. At first glance, he looked like any other man who had fallen through society's cracks. Ragged clothes layered awkwardly against the chill, torn and pulled low to shield his face. Shoes so worn the soles looked like they barely clung on. His posture was weary, as if life itself had pressed down on him too long. To most people, he would have been invisible, just another nameless shadow blending into the city's forgotten corners. But Maria noticed something different. His eyes. Even under the dim, flickering light of a broken street lamp, his eyes locked on hers with an intensity that made her chest tighten. They weren't glazed over from intoxication or hollow from hopelessness, like she had seen so many times before. These eyes were alive, sharp, and focused. The man's lips parted again. Don't talk, just listen. Maria's breath caught. Something about his tone. It wasn't desperate. It wasn't begging. It was steady, calculated, almost protective. The voice of someone used to giving orders and expecting them to be followed. She straightened her back, torn between instinct and curiosity. Every fiber of her training told her to control the situation. Identify the subject, assess the threat, keep the upper hand. But something deeper, something she couldn't quite explain, told her this was different. Her fingers hovered near her radio, but she hesitated. Was this a setup? A trap? The city was full of stories where officers let their guard down for just 1 second too long. She wasn't about to become another headline. "Excuse me," Maria finally said, her voice low but firm. The man didn't flinch. He simply raised his chin slightly, eyes flicking past her shoulder toward the mouth of the alley. His expression tightened, as though silently urging her to follow his gaze. Against her better judgment, Maria did, and that's when her stomach dropped. At first, she saw nothing but shadows pooling around the parked van across the street. But as her eyes adjusted, the shapes shifted. 2 figures crouched low, their movements subtle but unmistakable. They thought they were hidden, but from this angle, Maria saw just enough. The faint metallic gleam caught her eye. Her pulse spiked. A weapon. Her breath grew shallow, her heartbeat thundering in her ears. She had walked into something dangerous. And without that man's warning, she might have strolled directly into an ambush. She forced her body to remain still, though every instinct screamed at her to act, draw her weapon, call for backup, shout commands. But she couldn't. The attackers hadn't realized they'd been spotted yet, and the man's warning replayed in her mind. Don't talk. Her gaze flicked back to him, searching for an explanation. Who was he? Why had he been watching? And how did he know she was in danger before she did? For a moment, their eyes met again. In that silent exchange, Maria read something she hadn't expected. Clarity. This wasn't random. He wasn't rambling. He had seen what she hadn't. The homeless man leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping so low she could barely hear it over the hum of the distant street. They've been here before. Watching. Waiting. I told myself I wouldn't get involved, But tonight, they're after you." Maria's skin prickled. He spoke like someone who had studied them, like someone who understood danger intimately. Her right hand hovered closer to her holster now. She was trained for this, but the situation had flipped. Instead of being the one in control, she was suddenly relying on a stranger's warning. The alley seemed to grow colder, the shadows heavier. The flickering street lamp buzzed above, threatening to die out completely. For the first time that evening, Maria felt the weight of how close she was to becoming a statistic. The man shifted his weight, raising his hand slowly, deliberately, to show he wasn't a threat to her. His voice softened, but the urgency in it hadn't vanished. "Trust me," he said. "Just this once. Don't make a sound. Don't move too fast. Let me help." Maria's throat tightened. Her mind raced through possibilities. Trap, hallucination, manipulation, but none of them matched what she saw in his eyes. Those eyes weren't lying. For the briefest second, she allowed herself to consider the unthinkable, that her only lifeline tonight was a man society had forgotten. She steadied her breathing, pressed her back against the wall for cover, and gave him the faintest nod. And in that moment, without a word, a silent pact was formed. The officer and the homeless man, two strangers from worlds apart, were now bound together by something stronger than circumstance: survival. At first, Maria thought the man was simply another troubled soul rambling in the night. The city was filled with voices that carried broken stories. People talking to themselves, lost in a haze of addiction or despair. But this wasn't that. His words weren't random. They were deliberate, calculated. And then she saw it. Her eyes locked on the shadows he had motioned toward. Across a narrow street, tucked into the darkened crevice between a rusted van and a brick wall, two men crouched low. They thought they were invisible in the dark, but they weren't invisible to him. And now they weren't invisible to her. At first, all Maria caught was the shifting of movement, the slight shuffle of a shoe against gravel, the subtle sway of fabric. Then the glint of metal flashed in the dim streetlight. Her body tensed instantly. A knife. Her pulse spiked, pounding so hard her ears it nearly drowned out the city noise. She didn't need a second guess to know what she was looking at. These men weren't just loitering. They were lying in wait. Her breath slowed as her mind raced. An ambush. "They're waiting for me." The man by the dumpster hadn't lied. For a moment, Maria's entire body screamed at her to act. Her training kicked in automatically. Draw her weapon, issue commands, call for backup. But she didn't. She froze. Because she realized something terrifying. If she moved too fast, if she made the wrong sound, she'd expose herself. The attackers didn't yet know she had spotted them. That gave her a sliver of power, but only if she used it wisely. The man spoke again, his voice so low it felt like part of the night air. "They've been watching you," he said. "I've seen them hanging around here. Not drunks. Not thieves. They're organized. They've studied your routine." His words settled heavy in her chest. Maria prided herself on being careful, on never letting her guard down. She had walked this beat countless times. But had they really been waiting for her all this time? Her grip tightened near her holster. She wanted to reach for her radio, to press the button and call dispatch for backup. But the man shook his head slowly, almost reading her thoughts. "Don't," he whispered. "The second you touch that radio, they'll know. The static, your voice, it'll tip them off. And then it's over." Maria's jaw clenched. Every rule drilled into her at the academy told her to call it in. Backup was survival. But what if he was right? The alley amplified sound. Even a click might echo. And those two men looked coiled, ready to strike at the smallest sign. Her eyes flicked back to the figures. One crouched low, knife in hand, the blade trembling slightly as if he was impatient. The other stayed further back, hands out of sight, but Maria swore she caught a glimpse of something at his waist. A bulge, a weapon. Her stomach twisted. One knife, maybe a gun. Two against one. And in the shadows, she was out of her element. The man shifted slightly, just enough to keep her attention on him. His ragged clothes hung loose, but beneath them she saw a posture that didn't belong to someone broken. His shoulders were squared. His movements were measured. He wasn't panicked. He was assessing, calculating. "Listen," he murmured, his tone firm but calm. "I know what you're thinking, but this isn't random. They're not waiting to mug just anyone. They're here for you." Her throat tightened. The idea wasn't impossible. She'd made arrests, broken up gangs, dismantled operations. She had enemies. It came with the badge. But the thought of two men plotting her death in a shadowed alley made her skin crawl. Her instincts battled inside her chest. One voice shouted, "You don't trust strangers. He could be leading you into something worse." Another whispered, "He hasn't lied yet. He saw what you missed. Without him, you'd already be dead." She swallowed hard, keeping her voice low. "Who are you?" The man gave the faintest smile, though it didn't reach his tired eyes. "Doesn't matter right now. What matters is I've seen things you haven't. You don't want to believe me? Fine, but believe them." He tilted his head toward the crouched men. Maria didn't respond. She didn't need to. The sight of those shadows, tense and waiting, was enough to confirm his warning. The air in the alley grew thick, pressing down on her. Every second stretched like a rope pulled too tight. She imagined the attacker's thoughts, waiting for her move, waiting for her to step into their trap. They thought they were the hunters. But now, because of this stranger, she knew she was prey. Her breaths came slow and measured, each inhale controlled, each exhale silent. She leaned slightly against a rough brick wall for cover. If she was going to survive this, she needed to make every decision with precision. The man spoke again, his voice softer this time, almost human in its weariness. "I used to know danger like this. I can spot it before it happens. Tonight, you need me." Maria stared at him. He was dirty, ragged, someone society had stopped seeing long ago. Yet in this moment, he was the only reason she was still alive. She nodded, just once, small enough that no one else would see, and in that silent agreement, she surrendered a fraction of her trust. The knife-wielding man across the street shifted again, his patience wearing thin. Maria could feel the tension rising like a storm about to break. Her time was running out. She had seconds to decide. Follow her training and risk everything, or trust a stranger who had nothing to lose. The city around her seemed to vanish. No cars, no footsteps, just the hum of danger and the rasp of her own breath. And as the shadows waited, Maria realized the truth. Her survival tonight wasn't her badge, her training, or her weapon. It was in listening to the man society had discarded, the man who had told her simply, "Don't talk." The man near the dumpster moved slowly, his hands raised chest high in a gesture of peace. Even in the dim streetlight, Maria could see the wear etched into him. Scars crisscrossing his knuckles, calloused hands, and a body thin by hunger, but still carrying the faint traces of muscle. His clothes were torn and filthy, his shoes barely intact, but his movements weren't clumsy. They were deliberate, controlled. Maria kept her stance firm, eyes darting between him and the two shadowy figures across the street. Every muscle in her body buzzed with tension. She wanted answers, but the wrong question could get them both killed. Still, the words slipped out before she could stop herself. "Who are you?" she whispered, voice sharp. The man's lips curved into the faintest smile, though there was no humor in it. His voice, low and gravelly, carried something heavier than fear. "Who I am doesn't matter. Who I was, maybe that does." Maria frowned, keeping her weapon hand ready. His tone didn't belong to someone unstable. It belonged to someone carrying a story too heavy for words. "I wasn't always this," he said, gesturing vaguely to his ragged clothes, the dumpster, the empty streets. "Once, I wore a uniform too. Not like yours. Mine was heavier. Camouflage, boots laced tight, dog tags that cut into your chest when you ran through hell." Her eyes widened slightly. "Military." The man's gaze drifted past her for a moment, as if he were looking at something far away, something only he could see. "Special forces," he murmured. "The kind of job where you don't get to say no. Missions in deserts, jungles, cities swallowed by war. We were trained to move like ghosts, to see what others couldn't, to know danger before it showed its face." His voice grew quieter, but steadier. "That's how I knew about them. That's how I knew you were being hunted. Maria's breath caught. She wanted to dismiss him, to tell herself this was a story made up by a man who had nothing else left but lies. But the conviction in his eyes, the precision of his words, it didn't feel like fiction. He shifted his weight slightly, wincing as if an old injury still ached. When I came home, people clapped, shook my hand, called me a hero, but then the lights faded. The missions ended. And his voice cracked the first time, raw and unguarded. I didn't know how to live in a world without war. I didn't know how to be normal anymore. Maria's chest tightened. She had seen it before, veterans who slipped through the cracks, men and women who had given everything only to return to nothing. But hearing it here, in the middle of an alley where her life hung in the balance, made it feel different. Real. I lost my family, he whispered. My wife couldn't handle the nightmares, the anger, the silence. My little girl stopped recognizing me. I came back to a house that wasn't home anymore. And then the job stopped. Employers don't want broken soldiers. Before I knew it, the streets were all I had left. For a moment, silence hung between them. Maria felt the weight of a confession press against the cold night air. She studied him. This man who looked like society's failure, but carried himself like someone forged in fire. Her instincts wavered. She had been trained to see threats in strangers. But what she saw now wasn't a threat. It was a man who had been stripped of everything yet still chose to warn her, still chose to help. He gave a weary chuckle, though it sounded more like a sigh. Funny thing, officer, out here, no one asks who you used to be. No one cares if you bled for your country or saved a dozen lives overseas. Out here, you're just another shadow people pretend not to see. His eyes locked onto hers again, sharp and unflinching. But I see things. I can't stop seeing them. Patterns, movements, danger. It never goes away. And when I saw those two men watching you night after night, I knew sooner or later they'd make their move. Maria's pulse quickened. Night after night. Had they really been studying her that long? She clenched her fists, furious at herself for not noticing. The thought that her life had been stalked like prey unsettled her deeply. Why, tell me, she asked softly, her tone less guarded now. Why risk yourself? The man's smile faded, replaced by something heavier, regret. Because maybe I couldn't save my family. Maybe I couldn't save myself. But tonight, he inhaled sharply, steadying his voice. Tonight I can save someone. And maybe that'll mean I'm not completely useless after all. The raw honesty in his words hit Maria harder than she expected. This wasn't a man looking for pity. He wasn't spinning a story to manipulate her. He was a man trying to find redemption in the only way he knew how. The sounds of the city felt muted now, drowned out by the gravity of his story. Maria's weapon hand lowered slightly, not out of carelessness, but out of respect. She was still cautious, still wary, but something in her shifted. Her eyes flicked to the shadows again. The men across the street hadn't moved much, but she could feel their growing impatience. The danger was still real, still immediate. Yet, for the first time, she didn't feel completely alone. The homeless man, soldier, father, ghost, wasn't just a witness. He was her ally, and as he straightened his posture, shoulders square in a way that betrayed his past training, Maria realized something chilling and profound. This man, broken as he seemed, might be the only reason she survived the night. The night air grew heavier, as if the alley itself was holding its breath. Maria's hand twitched near her weapon, but her instinct screamed to wait. Across the street, the two crouched men shifted restlessly, shadows clinging to their bodies like armor. Their silence was more threatening than words. The man beside the dumpster leaned closer to Maria, his voice so soft it was nearly drowned by the hum of a distant streetlight. "They're growing impatient," he whispered. "The one with the knife, he's impulsive. The other, he's the real danger. He's waiting for the right moment." Maria's pulse quickened. She could see it now. The subtle tapping of the knife wielder's foot, the way the other man's hand hovered near his waistband. Every second stretched, wound tighter and tighter. Her voice was a whisper, trembling but firm. "What's your plan?" The man's eyes narrowed. scanning the alley with the precision of someone who had lived this moment 1,000 times in another life. I'll draw them out, force them to move before they're ready. When they do, you use the dumpster for cover, flank left, and get the angle. Don't hesitate. The second man has a gun. Don't let him reach it. Maria's stomach twisted. You'll get yourself killed. He gave a grim smile, the kind that carried both resignation and courage. Better me than you. You still wear that badge. You still matter. Before Maria could argue, he bent down, grabbed a crushed soda can from the littered ground, and with a flick of his wrist, sent it clattering across the alley. The sound exploded in the silence like a gunshot. Instantly, the two men's heads snapped toward the noise. The knife wielder surged forward, teeth bared in a snarl, while the second man's hand darted to his waistband. Now! The homeless man barked, his voice cutting through the chaos. Maria dove behind the dumpster, her weapon sliding free in a smooth motion. Her training kicked in, breath steady, sights aligned, finger tight on the trigger. The knife wielder lunged straight at the homeless man, blade glinting under flickering light. But the man moved with a speed that betrayed his ragged appearance. He sidestepped, grabbed the attacker's wrist, and twisted sharply. The knife clattered to the ground. The struggle was brutal, primal. The attacker swung wildly with his free hand, but the homeless man absorbed the blow and countered with a sharp elbow to the ribs. For a moment, Maria saw flashes of his past. The soldier hidden beneath the dirt and rags, instincts honed by years of survival. Meanwhile, the second attacker pulled a pistol from his waistband. Police! Maria's voice rang out, strong and commanding. Drop it. The man froze, eyes flicking between her and his partner locked in combat. For a heartbeat, Maria thought he might surrender. But then his jaw clenched and his hand tightened on the weapon. Maria didn't hesitate. She fired a warning shot into the air, the gun's crack splitting the night. Sparks showered from the street lamp as startled pigeons erupted into flight. Drop it now, she shouted again, advancing from behind cover, her stance steady. The second man faltered, fear flashing across his face. The warning shot had rattled him. His grip loosened, and the gun clattered to the pavement. Hands where I can see them, Maria commanded, her voice sharp as steel. But the fight wasn't over. The knife wielder, though disarmed, fought with desperate fury. He slammed the homeless man against the dumpster, fists hammering. The older man grunted in pain, but his grip remained unyielding. He swept his leg, knocking the attacker off balance, and they both crashed to the ground. Maria's eyes darted between them and the second man, who looked ready to bolt. She had to make a choice, help her unlikely ally or secure the armed suspect. Her decision came instantly. She sprinted forward, kicking the discarded pistol further out of reach before slamming the suspect against the van. With one fluid motion, she yanked her cuffs free and snapped them onto his wrists. The man cursed, thrashing, but Maria pressed her knee into his back. "Stay down," she barked. Behind her, the struggle raged on. The homeless man's strength was waning. His body was wiry, underfed, and battered from years on the streets. The knife wielder pinned him, fists raining down. "Officer!" The man gasped, blood on his lip. Maria spun around. Her weapon came up, her sights trained on the attacker. "Freeze!" she shouted. But the attacker didn't stop. His rage blinded him. He raised his fist for another crushing blow. Maria fired. The bullet struck the ground inches from his head, sending shards of concrete spraying his face. The man jerked back, stunned, his eyes wide with shock. On the ground, Maria thundered, "Now!" The attacker, chest heaving, finally threw his hands up. The fight drained from him. He collapsed onto the pavement, groaning. The homeless man shoved him aside, staggering to his feet. His chest rose and fell rapidly, sweat and blood streaking his face. But when his eyes met Maria's, they burned with the same fire she had seen earlier, the fire of someone who refused to give up. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. Backup was on the way. The tension in the alley began to break. But Maria knew how close it had been. Seconds. Inches. She holstered her weapon, rushing to the man's side. "Are you hurt?" He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, leaving a smear of red. "I've had worse," he said with a half-smile, though his voice was rough with pain. Maria steadied him as he leaned against the wall. Her heart was still pounding, but relief flooded her chest. He had risked everything for a stranger. As the flashing lights filled the alley and officers poured in, Maria realized something she'd never forget. Without him, she wouldn't be alive. The ambush was broken. The attackers were subdued. And a man the world had forgotten had just proven himself a hero. Red and blue lights painted the alley walls, swirling across the cracked bricks and litter-strewn pavement. The wail of sirens had finally reached its crescendo, and now uniformed officers swarmed in, weapons raised, voices barking orders. The two attackers were dragged to their feet, their curses drowned out by the clink of handcuffs snapping shut. Maria stood tall, her weapon holstered but her body still thrumming with adrenaline. Her eyes, however, weren't on the suspects. They were on him. The man leaned against the wall, chest heaving, a fresh cut bleeding at the corner of his mouth. His ragged clothes clung to his thin frame, soaked with sweat and dirt. He looked battered, exhausted, and broken. Yet in his eyes, those sharp, soldier's eyes, there was something else. Relief. Maybe even pride. "You okay, officer?" he asked, voice rough but steady. Maria blinked. He had just taken punches meant for her, risked his life for her, and still his first question was about her. The lump in her throat tightened. "I should be asking you that," she said softly, stepping closer. "You saved my life tonight." He gave a weary chuckle, one that turned into a wince as pain shot through his ribs. "Guess I still know a thing or two." Paramedics arrived, moving briskly with a stretcher and medical bags. One knelt beside him, shining a light into his eyes. "Sir, we need to get you checked out." The man waved them off weakly. "I'm fine. Seen worse." But Maria wasn't convinced. She crouched beside him, her voice firmer now. "Let them help. That's an order." His eyes flicked to hers, and for a second, he almost looked amused. Old habits die hard, always taking orders. Slowly, reluctantly, he allowed the medics to examine him. As they cleaned the blood from his face and wrapped gauze around his ribs, Maria studied him more closely. The scars told stories he hadn't shared, battles both overseas and here at home. She thought of what he confessed earlier. His family, his daughter, the life he'd lost. The world had abandoned him. But tonight, he had proven himself more than society's label of homeless. Another officer approached Maria, giving her a quick report. "Both suspects are in custody. One had priors, armed robbery, assault. The other's clean, but he was carrying an unregistered firearm. Looks like you walked right into an ambush." Maria nodded grimly. "I wouldn't be standing here if it weren't for him." She tilted her head toward the man being treated. The officer followed her gaze, his brow furrowing. "Him? He's just some—" "Don't finish that sentence," Maria snapped, sharper than she intended. "He's not just some anything. He's the reason I'm alive." The officer hesitated, then gave a respectful nod before walking away. The man chuckled again, though it was laced with pain. "Didn't think I'd hear someone sticking up for me tonight." Maria looked at him firmly. "You deserve it. You don't belong in the shadows. Not after what you did." He shook his head slowly. "The shadows are all I got left." "No," she said, her voice softer now but edged with conviction. "That's what you think, but you're wrong." The paramedics helped him onto the stretcher, strapping him in gently. His eyes darted nervously, as if he feared being taken somewhere he didn't belong. Maria stepped closer, her presence steadying him. "I'm not letting them just patch you up and send you back to the streets," she told him. "You fought for me tonight. Let me fight for you now." Confusion flickered across his face. "What do you mean?" Maria grabbed her radio. "Dispatch! I want someone from a veteran outreach unit to meet us at the hospital. Immediate." His eyes widened slightly. No one had said those words to him in years. Outreach. Help. A lifeline. He blinked, his voice trembling despite his effort to steady it. "Why would you after everything? Why would you care?" Maria leaned closer, her gaze unwavering. Because you're not invisible. Not anymore. And because people like you, you're worth saving. For a moment, his face crumbled, not from pain, but from emotion he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. His eyes glistened, and he quickly turned his head away, embarrassed. The paramedics lifted the stretcher, wheeling him toward the ambulance. Maria walked beside him, ignoring the chaos around them. The suspects being loaded into patrol cars, the chatter of radios, the flashing lights, all of it faded into the background. The only thing that mattered was that this man, this forgotten soldier, was finally being seen. As they reached the ambulance, he grabbed her hand weakly. His grip was rough, callous, but steady. "Thank you," he whispered, "for seeing me, for not letting me disappear." Maria squeezed his hand firmly. "No," she said, "thank you, for reminding me that heroes don't always wear badges or uniforms. Sometimes they're the ones we stop looking at." The doors closed, the ambulance pulling away with its siren muted. Maria stood there for a long moment, the night settling back into silence around her. She thought about how close she had come to death, how quickly her life could have ended in that alley. But she also thought about the man who had stepped forward when no one else would, a man the world had discarded. Now, because of him, she was alive. And maybe, just maybe because of her, he would get a second chance at life. As the last patrol car rolled out and the alley emptied, Maria whispered into the night, almost to herself, "You're not invisible anymore." And though he was gone from sight, she knew he had heard her.